In the animal kingdom, pack hunters like wolves and lions dominate not through individual strength, but through coordinated group tactics and specialized roles. Research shows that around 80 to 95% of carnivores hunt alone, but the elite predators, wolves, lions, spotted hyenas, and dolphins, hunt cooperatively, achieving success rates impossible for solitary hunters. They use division of labor, with each member performing specific tasks: drivers who chase prey, blockers who cut off escape routes, and ambushers who wait in strategic positions. The most successful pack hunters develop what scientists call collaborative hunting, where individuals adopt complementary roles rather than simply attacking together. This coordination requires not just physical ability, but advanced communication, timing, and an understanding of each teammate's strengths. The Legion of Boom operated exactly like nature's most lethal pack hunters, with each member fulfilling a specialized role in their coordinated assault on opposing offenses. They called themselves the Legion of Boom, and for 4 straight years, they terrorized the NFL like no defense had in decades. They led the league in scoring defense 4 consecutive seasons, a feat not accomplished since the 1950s Cleveland Browns. They held the greatest single-season offense in NFL history to just 8 points in a Super Bowl. They forced the league to change the rules because their hitting was too violent for modern football. They turned a franchise that had never won a championship into champions, and they did it by making receivers afraid to cross the middle of the field. But were they football's greatest defensive unit ever assembled, or were they just bullies who got lucky when the rules favored their style of play? It was January 8th, 2011. The Seattle Seahawks had just shocked the NFL world by beating the defending Super Bowl champion New Orleans Saints 41-36 in one of the greatest upsets in playoff history. But for all the celebrations surrounding Marshawn Lynch's Beastquake run, the Seahawks defense had been exposed. They'd given up 36 points to Drew Brees, nearly 500 yards of total offense, and looked completely outmatched against elite competition. This was a team that had just finished 7-9, the worst record ever to make the playoffs. The franchise was at a crossroads. Pete Carroll had been hired just 1 year earlier, bringing his college enthusiasm to a league that had already rejected him once. The Seahawks hadn't won a championship in their 35-year existence. CenturyLink Field, now known as Lumen Field, was often half empty as fans lost faith in yet another rebuilding project. Season ticket sales had plummeted to just around 40,000, embarrassing for a city that prided itself on sports passion. Carroll knew his defense needed a complete philosophical overhaul. While other teams chased speed and finesse, he had a different vision. He wanted big physical defensive backs who could punish receivers and eliminate the short passing game that was becoming the league's obsession. It was a throwback mentality in a forward-thinking league, and most experts thought he was crazy. The foundation was already in place, though few recognized it at the time. In 2010, the Seahawks had drafted Earl Thomas with the 14th overall pick, a 5'10" safety from Texas who ran a 4.49 40-yard dash and had an uncanny ability to read quarterbacks. Thomas was small by traditional safety standards, but he had range that defied physics. Sports Illustrated would later describe him as a great cover safety from anywhere to anywhere on the field, able to take ridiculous angles and read plays with microscopic precision. 5 rounds later, Seattle selected Cam Chancellor, a 6'3", 232-pound, strong safety from Virginia Tech who hit like a linebacker but moved like a defensive back. Chancellor was the tallest and heaviest safety in the NFL, and his violent tackles would soon become legendary. He would later say he modeled his game after the late Sean Taylor, watching YouTube highlights before every game to get into a darker place that made him play better. But the most important piece came in 2011 when Carroll signed an overlooked cornerback from the Canadian Football League. Brandon Browner had been undrafted out of Oregon State, spent 4 seasons terrorizing receivers in Calgary, and was 27 years old when Seattle took a chance on him. At 6 feet 4 inches and 221 pounds, Browner was a physical freak who could jam receivers at the line and run with them downfield. In the same draft, the Seahawks selected Richard Sherman in the 5th round, a Stanford graduate who had switched from wide receiver to cornerback and was still learning the position. Sherman's path to stardom wasn't guaranteed. He was sitting at home with his family during the 2011 draft, watching players he considered inferior get selected ahead of him. He was livid, by his own admission, about falling to the 5th round. But that chip on his shoulder would fuel one of the most dominant cornerback careers in NFL history. The philosophy Carroll implemented was deceptively simple but revolutionary in execution. They would run cover 1, cover 2, and cover 3 schemes that relied on the athleticism and instincts of their defensive backs rather than complex coverages. They wanted to hit receivers so hard that quarterbacks would think twice about throwing their way. During practice, receivers wore shields strapped from neck to mid-thigh, while defensive backs coach Chris Richard taught his players to keep their hits within that zone to avoid penalties. Carroll had studied great cornerback tandems like Mike Haynes and Lester Hayes, but he wanted something different. His defensive backs would be bigger, stronger, and more violent than anything the league had seen. They would challenge the NFL's new emphasis on offense with old-school intimidation. The early results were promising, but not dominant. In 2011, the Seahawks finished 7-9 again, but their defense showed flashes of brilliance. Thomas, Chancellor, and Browner all made the Pro Bowl, while Sherman began to establish himself as a starter after injuries to veterans. The secondary was beginning to gel, but they were still missing that final piece that would make them legendary. That piece came in the form of a nickname. On August 2nd, 2012, Chancellor appeared on a Seattle radio show and asked fans to suggest a name for their secondary. A listener on Twitter suggested Legion of Boom, playing off the way they brought the boom to opposing receivers. The name was perfect. It captured both their physical style and their comic book villain persona. Google searches for the term immediately skyrocketed. The 2012 season marked their first statement to the league. Seattle finished 11-5 and made the playoffs as a wildcard team. Their defense allowed the fewest points in the NFL, 245 over 16 games. Sherman led the league with 8 interceptions despite being snubbed from the Pro Bowl. The secondary was no longer just promising. They were becoming feared. But it was one play that October that announced their arrival on the national stage. On October 14th, 2012, the Seahawks hosted Tom Brady and the New England Patriots in a Sunday night showcase. Late in the game, with Seattle clinging to a 24-23 lead, Sherman picked off Brady to seal the victory. After the game, Sherman posted a photo on Twitter showing himself yelling at a dejected Brady with the caption, "You mad, bro?" The image went viral and established Sherman as the Legion's loudest voice and biggest personality. The 2013 season was when the Legion of Boom reached its terrifying peak. They allowed just 231 points, the fewest in the NFL. They gave up only 14 passing touchdowns while intercepting 28 passes. Sherman led the league with 8 interceptions again. Earl Thomas had 105 tackles and 5 interceptions from the free safety position. Cam Chancellor delivered punishing hits that left receivers nearly unconscious and fumbling. They became the first defense since the 1985 Chicago Bears to lead the league in fewest points allowed, fewest yards allowed, and most takeaways. What made them special wasn't just their individual talent, but how their skills complemented each other. Thomas had the range to cover sideline to sideline, allowing Chancellor to come down and deliver devastating hits in the box. Sherman's height and intelligence allowed him to eliminate one side of the field completely. Browner provided physical jamming at the line that disrupted timing routes. Byron Maxwell emerged as a reliable slot defender who could force fumbles with his peanut punch technique, learned from Charles Tillman. Teams stopped throwing to Sherman's side of the field entirely. The Seahawks would line him up on the opponent's best receiver and dare quarterbacks to test him. They rarely did. Sherman was so dominant that he was briefly the highest-paid cornerback in football when he signed his extension in 2014. The playoffs that year were a masterclass in defensive domination. In the divisional round against New Orleans, they held the Saints' high-powered offense to just 15 points and 409 yards. The Saints didn't score until early in the fourth quarter, and the game was decided when Sherman deflected a pass that Malcolm Smith intercepted to clinch the victory. The NFC Championship game against San Francisco became the stuff of legend. With less than 30 seconds remaining and San Francisco driving for the winning touchdown, Colin Kaepernick threw toward Michael Crabtree in the corner of the end zone. Sherman, who had been targeted by Crabtree all game, got his hand on the ball and deflected it to Smith for the game-clinching interception. The play would be dubbed the tip, and voted by Seahawks fans as the most important moment in franchise history. But it was what happened after the play that captured America's attention. Sherman ran over to Crabtree and attempted to shake hands, but Crabtree shoved him in the face mask. Sherman responded by making a choking gesture toward Kaepernick and was flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct. Then came the interview with Aaron Andrews that would define Sherman's career. "I'm the best corner in the game," Sherman screamed into the camera. "When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get. Don't you ever talk about me? Don't you open your mouth about the best, or I'm gonna shut it for you real quick." LOB. The rant was polarizing. Some called Sherman a thug, a label he later said was an accepted way of calling somebody the N-word now. Others saw it as pure emotion from a player who had just made the biggest play of his career. Either way, it made the Legion of Boom must-see television. Super Bowl 48 was their coronation. They faced the Denver Broncos, who had just completed the greatest single-season passing offense in NFL history. Peyton Manning had thrown for 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns. The Broncos had scored 606 points during the regular season. They were unstoppable, except the Legion of Boom stopped them cold. The game was over 12 seconds in when the Seahawks forced a safety on a bad snap. They led for 59 minutes and 48 seconds, the longest lead time in Super Bowl history. The final score was 43-8, and it could have been worse. Manning completed just 34 of 49 passes for 280 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. The Broncos' record-breaking offense was held to just 306 total yards. Chancellor intercepted Manning and delivered bone-crushing hits that had Denver receivers hearing footsteps. Sherman left the game with a high ankle sprain, but played most of it on one leg. Thomas patrolled the deep middle like a hawk, erasing any hope of big plays. Byron Maxwell forced a fumble and looked like a veteran despite being in just his second year as a starter. The Seahawks became the fastest team to score in Super Bowl history and the first team ever to score via safety, interception return for touchdown, and kickoff return for touchdown in the same Super Bowl. It was a complete domination by a defense that had spent 3 years building toward this moment. The following season proved their championship wasn't a fluke. The Seahawks went 12-4 and returned to the Super Bowl, becoming the first team since the 1993-94 Buffalo Bills to reach consecutive Super Bowls with largely the same roster. They were even better defensively in 2014, allowing just 254 points, the fewest in the NFL for the 3rd straight year. The Legion of Boom had become more than just a defensive unit, they were a cultural phenomenon. Nike sold Legion of Boom merchandise. ESPN compared them to legendary defenses like the Purple People Eaters and Steel Curtain. Young defensive backs across the country tried to emulate their physical style and trash-talking bravado, but their second Super Bowl appearance ended in heartbreak, marking the beginning of the end. Against the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 49, the Legion of Boom appeared to be headed for back-to-back championships. Instead, injury to the secondary Russell Wilson throwing a slant pass toward Ricardo Lockett, and honestly, not feeding beast mode the ball at the 1-yard line, led to disaster in the form of an interception by Malcolm Butler, the Patriots' rookie cornerback. The Legion of Boom's championship window had slammed shut on the goal line. The dynasty began to crumble almost immediately. In 2015, Chancellor held out for the first 2 games, demanding a new contract. The Seahawks started 0-2 without him and struggled to recapture their dominance even after he returned. They made the playoffs, but lost in the divisional round to Carolina. Then injuries piled up. Sherman was sidelined with an Achilles injury in 2017. He ruptured the tendon in November and was done for the season. Chancellor suffered a neck injury in the same game against Arizona that would ultimately end his career. The 2 leaders of the Legion of Boom were gone, and the magic and ferocity went with them. Thomas played 1 more season in Seattle before breaking his leg in 2018 and giving the middle finger to the Seahawks sideline as he was carted off. He knew his time in Seattle was over. Sherman was released in March 2018 and signed with division rival San Francisco. Chancellor never played again, forced to retire due to spinal stenosis. The Legion of Boom era officially ended when Thomas signed with Baltimore in 2019. For the first time since 2010, none of the original members were on the Seahawks roster. An era that had defined a franchise and terrorized a league was over, but their impact on the NFL cannot be overstated. They forced the league to change rules about defensive contact. They proved that physical, intimidating defense could still dominate in an offensive era. They transformed the Seahawks from laughingstock to champions and gave Seattle its first Super Bowl title. The Legion of Boom wasn't just the greatest defense of the 2010s, they were the last great defense of the old NFL, before rule changes made their style of play impossible. They were villains to some, heroes to others, but legends to all who witnessed their 4-year reign of terror. In an era when defense was supposed to be dead, they proved that with the right players and the right attitude, defense could still win championships. They were the Legion of Boom, and there will never be another defense quite like them.